All right, the recording has started, and this is the March 1st, it's March now, 2021 Crossplane community meeting. Biggest news going on right now is that the V1.1, the first minor release since the major 1.0 release, is happening tomorrow. So March 2nd, the release 1.1 will be rolling out. And Dan, you've already got some steps here, some of the timing that you're planning out here. Do you want to go any more details on that?
No, not too much. The main thing is
This is
just
good.
that we should probably cut a Crossplane runtime release today, so we can go ahead and pin that. And I have down at the bottom, I have some PRs that are relevant, but this is all for now.
Got it. Got it. Yeah, I don't think there's been major, features or anything going in the past couple of weeks because we've been on a feature freeze and code freeze over the last 2 weeks. So I don't think anything too big has gone in. So perhaps some of the main feature areas don't have big updates since last week. But also, it probably makes sense though to kind of go over the highlights of the release and things that are being included in there. Phil and Dan, do you want to kind of kick off some of the highlights for the release that we are being included?
Yeah, totally. And do you want to take the security and support improvements?
Sure. Yeah. I guess that's mainly around stuff we've talked about a few different meetings now, but primarily around the different sources for credentials. And so we mostly focused on the credential supplying side rather than the connection secret output side, which I think is something we'll also want to investigate moving forward as well. But basically, this enables you to provide credentials via methods other than Kubernetes secrets, which is definitely something we'd heard a lot of community members asking about. And in the updated docs that will be published and activated to the latest tomorrow, we'll have the vault guide in there and that sort of thing.
Cool. Yeah, so for the provider acceleration, kind of work continues there. There have been some enhancements on the ACK side that I think Movapic is kind of wrapping up. And we have a VMware provider that's been co-generated by Casey that's kind of in an experimental mode. Not sure if that actually kind of got out of experimental mode, but Curatech and a handful of others are interested in kind of kicking the tires with that and providing early feedback. And so if that's a use case that is important to you, definitely jump into the providers channel and just let Casey know. And you can get some of those early bits and provide feedback on that. On the composition front, I think Nick's online. And so Nick, do you want to just give a quick update on what, enhancements? I know there's been community enhancements that have been added in, I think bi-directional patching and some others, but.
Yeah, so Kellen, who's also on the call, added support for bi-directional patching, which means you can now effectively patch in reverse of the way that you could in 1.0. So you can patch from composed resources to the composite. I believe since 1.0 as well, Ben Agricola added patch set support. So you can now sort of group sets of patches that you might repeat frequently and just sort of refer to them by name rather than having to sort of repeat them a bunch of times. And I feel like I maybe added a feature too, but I don't remember what it was. Oh yeah, so I added some machinery to allow you to reorder patches. So we now recommend that, or reorder resources or resource templates within a composition. So we now recommend that you name your resource template, so that allows you to basically insert new ones in the middle of your array if you need to, or delete ones from the array, and they'll be garbage collected, as opposed to sort of effectively treating it like an immutable array of templates. I think that is most of the headline features for composition. Apologies if I've forgotten any.
Nick, do you think it's worth updating our the reference platforms that we have, the reference configurations, to kind of use the named patch set as well too, to just kind of show off like the best practices around that, if that's the way that we recommend, then updating those to be in accordance with that?
That's a good question. How often do you think that people use those as references? Documentation is all updated to mention it. So I would say not. I mean, yes, it's a good idea. Is it do it this week good idea? I don't know.
Yeah, fair enough. Cool. Yeah, I would like for those over time to serve as not only as practical examples, but also informed and examples that are well aligned with our best practices and the way that we want to recommend people be authoring their own configurations. So yeah, probably updating it sometime soon makes sense.
Do we have sort of clear ownership of those at the moment? Like it seems, I don't know if it's implied that like this should be part of our PR flow, like we update the docs and things like that, then we should go update those, or is it more sort of to go do it?
Yeah, it's like I'm maintaining it with my spare time, and that's the extent of the ownership currently. So yeah, it's not something that I think should be inserted into the like community flow of must update. It's like part of Crossplane core documentation and stuff like that. So I can take that myself.
Yeah, maybe you and I can set up some time at some point, because you could potentially you could use some bi-directional patching in there or something. I'm sure we could do a pass over and see if anything that's there at the moment could be improved with the new features of 1.1.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I want the fanciest, the highest level of fancy I could possibly get. I will go for
all the latest hotness. Yes.
Yes, all the way. Awesome. Cool. So 1.1 going out tomorrow. Any other notes for the 1.1 release or features included, et cetera? We're planning on doing a blog post, I assume, as well too, to kind of make a little noise and summarize these features in a nice, easy to read format.
Yep. Yeah, totally. So that'll be kind of going out later this week, and then just a couple updates on some of those other bullets there. On the multi-language front, met with Elad and basically kind of working through the UX, kind of generating from CRDs down into the CDK operator that basically can kind of run behind the API line. And so kind of looking at ways to kind of generate scaffold for that. And so that's likely to be our go forward direction. You can basically do it statically at build time, or you can run it dynamically behind the Kubernetes API line. So that'll probably be our direction for that. And there's just better kind of code gen support around that, but that multi-language support is not actually going to be in 1.1. It's just still an experimental mode in the Crossplane CDK repo, which you can try out today, and there's docs and stuff on that. But and then for the webhook support, Nick or Dan, I don't know if we have webhooks on the line or not, but did he get that wrapped up for 1.1?
I think he just got a design wrapped up. Actioning the webhook stuff is a fair amount of manual labor. So he made good progress on the design. There is some stuff that we need to figure out before we merge that. But yeah, so we're doing a new planning at Upbound today, and I think we need to figure out at some point, like, this is like the third time that we've like done the design for webhooks, and I think we need to figure out if we want to spend the time to actually like build them at some point, because we do keep running into cases where we're like, at the moment Dan has a issue with GKE that's blocking upgrading an SDK, and a solution to that would be serving two different versions of the GKE API, but we can't because we don't have conversion webhooks. So
cool. Okay. And then for the rate limiting and the back off, Dan, is that something that we got added in as like the more customization for that?
Yeah. So we changed the way that I guess the managed reconciler works, and that's been updated in the major providers right now, and that we'll make sure to note those changes in the release notes on Crossplane runtime, which, as mentioned above, planning on doing a release of today. So most of the major providers have already been updated, and that can just be kind of like consumed as needed. It's not like a breaking change or anything like that. It's just going to provide a better experience for providers that update to use that. And I also think that next release cycle, we might incorporate some of the rate limiting techniques into core Crossplane to improve some of the waits we do for things to get reconciled.
Cool. That's awesome. And then the cluster API stuff is just kind of a long running thread. So that's not something that would come into 1.1, but any updates to share there?
Yeah, it's about ready for a demo. So I've been doing the live streams on that, which folks can watch on the YouTube channel. But I think it will be a little while before we we officially say this is support. It's going to be a slow roll kind of, but it involves adding a bunch of new resources to provider GCP. So folks can take advantage of those in the meantime as well, whether they're using Cluster API or not.
Cool. Yeah, that'll be super awesome when that comes to fruition. So a lot of power with Crossplane backing Cluster API. So cool. Well, I think, Jared, that's probably it for 1.1. Is there any other things that made it in that isn't in this list, or is this basically what we're going to go out with? It's pretty broad categories here. So the items that we covered, I guess, more specifically, but cool. Awesome. Yeah. So, I mean, and we're basically still really focused on, stability and, kind of having a good post 1.0 experience and whatnot. So a lot of work has kind of gone in making sure that's still the case. And there's been some like docs fine tuning and that kind of a thing. So if there are things that come up in terms of what can be improved, definitely let us know, and happy to get that added into 1.2.
Yeah, awesome. Definitely looking forward to having the first minor release go out now. The first one of the year, I suppose, since 1.0 went out around the holiday time. So very excited about that. All right, then we can move on, I believe, to the community topics section. Dan, you mentioned that you have been doing like an ongoing series of live streams about Cluster API, and you've done one for GKE Autopilot, I think, too. Anything to dive into there, like a little summary of some of the experiences there? Is that a cadence you're going to keep up with, you think?
Yeah, as long as we have something that would be relevant to show on there. I mean, it doesn't have to be super entertaining, as anyone who's watched recently knows. But something like Cluster API or the Autopilot things are things that are relevant for a broader community than just Crossplane, which makes them good candidates for doing things like that. The Cluster API stuff will probably continue for quite some time. So whenever I have the opportunity, I'd like to keep doing that. Also, if there's anything that folks would like to be covered on one of those, I probably will not, like prepare specific streams, because we already have those with biweekly TBS stuff. But just in terms of like things that I'd be doing anyway, happy to do streams on that. And obviously, anyone else in the Crossplane community is also welcome to stream things on our channel as well. Just ping me and we can get you set up.
Yeah, thoughts about like the consistent content coming out there and some of the code. The GKE one, the GKE Autopilot one, was super interesting because it was like, you were adding support for it as their support was rolling out, to all their data centers and users and stuff. So that was like, and then the team behind it was, engaged and active on the live stream too. And they were like, okay, the docs update should be rolled out now. And it was just really exciting to have that, kind of up to date, very, very topical and current addition of functionality. And then with the engagement with the GCP team as well too was really, really cool to see, I think. All right. So yeah, hashtag will keep up that cool work on live streams and such. Quick update on our LFX mentorship program. The Linux Foundation is what LFX I believe stands for. So we're just participating in a mentorship program there where we had a couple of projects that were open for applications and submissions over the past month or so. And we reviewed all of the applications and selected one of the applicants there, Rahul Grover, for the project of our end-to-end integration tests. So that's an area that we've wanted to invest in for quite a while. I think we have some good ideas around, but having Rahul come in and get ramped up in the community, start contributing, and kind of take some of the early foundations of integration tests and end-to-end coverage and all that sort of stuff, and continue to take that further and invest in that as part of the Linux Foundation's mentorship program here is something we're super, super excited about. So the program starts today. This is the first day here, so we'll be working with Rahul to get him, revved up and welcome to the community and support him as as he needs to be successful here in diving into this feature and being a contributor in Crossplane. So really excited about that for a lot of reasons. Yeah, hopefully we'll be seeing Rahul on some of these calls going forward as well too. Hey, quick update on the Cncf incubation proposal. So we now have a enough production users confirmed and consented to share their information as part of the proposal. So now that we've got that information collected, my goal is to finish the proposal in like drafting and getting some feedback from the team here itself, and then opening it in the technical oversight committee's repo in the CNCF's org. So which is part of the formal steps for the process there. So I want to have that opened up by Wednesday, because I'm taking a few days off at the end of the week here and into next week. So I'd love to have that opened and have that process started more officially here with a formal application upstream by Wednesday. And there's a few folks on the call here that responded to and provided information about their use cases and such. So thank you very much to everybody here on the call that was able to help out with that. I definitely appreciate that. That helps advance what we're doing here. All right. Quick note on the Crossplane Community Day. That one, this upcoming one in May is part of KubeCon itself. It's a 0-day event at KubeCon. It's hosted by the CNCF. So the call for proposals is still open now. We've got a number of great proposals already in there. And the end of this week is the, oh, thanks, Krish. Looks like we need to update that the banner there on the crossplane.io website to reflect that the end of the week here is when the CFP closes. So we still have until the end of this week to get a proposal in there to speak as part of the community day. And we are all more than happy to support and give feedback and provide. You can feel free to use project maintainers as resources to drive your application or your proposal to completion in a state you're feeling good about. Happy to have lots of folks on the call here talk as well too. Phil, any other notes on the community day from you?
No, it looks like we're starting to get a pretty good turnout, and we're looking forward to the event. So a lot of awesome use cases for Crossplane, and always good to hear from the community how they're using it and so forth. So yeah, should be good.
Awesome. Okay, so yep, looking forward to more proposals there, and then the event itself in May is going to be great. All right, so a positive update on the Docker Hub open source project application that we did. After a back and forth there and being initially rejected, I got the CNCF involved, and I guess there was some confusion amongst the people running the open source program there at the Docker Hub, and all CNCF projects are supposed to be approved and allowed into the program there. So I've got confirmation from the people running the program that we are accepted into it, and they have an internal service ticket opened to add the Crossplane namespace to the allowed list of namespaces that will no longer be throttled. They're also adding a feature over the next week or so to have like a little badge or some sort of marker on your Docker Hub page that says that you're a community project or an open source program project or whatever the correct nomenclature is there. So it'll be clear when you go to the page that we are accepted and we're part of that deal there. But I hope that either already or this week that their internal service teams get that completed, that get us into the allow list and able to be officially part of that. So it's been a bit of a long process here with a bit of confusion, but I think we are on the other side of that. All right. Any other community topics things to talk about before we move into some of the PRs that are open for discussion? Okay. Cool. Then we could hop down into the PRs. It looks like Chris, you were first.
Mm-hmm. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you, Chris. Go for it.
Okay, perfect. So the issue that I put up for discussion in this meeting was actually an older one. I guess not too old. I think it's from September. And so this was an issue created by Nick to discuss Crossplane supporting arbitrary Kubernetes resources in compositions. There hasn't been too much discussion on this issue since, I guess, December of last year. And I was just wondering, I wanted to get an idea of what people in, on this meeting thought about this issue. How do people feel about composition supporting arbitrary resources?
I can.
My person.
I know that I think we probably already have my opinion pretty well put out there, but I did want to weigh in. The summary of my concern here is balancing if you increase the scope of what the project is for, if we officially say it's all good to compose config maps, it's all good to compose namespace resources. We have a couple of these things that composition wasn't designed for. Composition is the intent originally is that composition would be something that would be used to compose stuff that is installed by a provider from Crossplane, and that those features are sort of somewhat tightly coupled with each other in order to solve a specific set of problems. But then by accident, or by happenstance, we happen to support composing stuff that is not from a provider. So my chief concern with officially saying it's cool, we'll support, whatever your use case is there. I mean, it'd be really nice to help folks, but I think we do need to be conscious that somewhat changes the mandate of the project, right? It potentially expands the scope of Crossplane from where this project that helps you with your cloud native infrastructure and lets you build new API abstractions on top of that, to just we're a composition engine for Kubernetes. And that can have definitely subtle implications when designing things, because now we have to, if someone comes to us and they're like, actually, I'm just using composition to install a bunch of config maps and I don't have providers, we have to account for their use case when we're designing things. So it's a little bit of maybe my paranoid architect hat on, where I'm sort of thinking, oh God, what happens if in 6 months we want to build this new feature and we can't because we have to support that? One thing that would, and we're already getting some of this on this issue, but one thing that would be super useful here is to just get more sort of experience reports, as they'd sort of put it, in the Go community. Because one thing that I've heard talked about here is if folks, I think a lot of folks are wanting to use composition with a mix of Crossplane providers and other things, which is probably the most compelling use case to me. I think if folks were using, let's say, composition just for like all not Crossplane stuff, no providers, one approach there is we could just fork, or someone could fork Crossplane and have a side project that was experimentally taking composition and building it out for that use case sort of thing. But if people are doing a little bit of both, then maybe it makes more sense to build that in our project. Does that kind of make sense?
By the way, if I may, actually, this is something that my team has been actually trying that. We actually fork Crossplane, we did some change to be able to compose arbitrary resources, because we actually had some use case where we like to reuse some of the existing operators that we have, and we don't really want to rebuild everything wrapping with Crossplane kind of in cluster resources. So, I mean, it will be a lot of work. So that's why, I keep on actually getting people, at least in IBM, even Red Hat, telling me, this composition actually is very valuable, but, we don't really want to rebuild everything as a cross-plane provider because we already have a lot of investment in operators and other things. So this is a very common discussion I hear almost every day. So
Yeah.
I think it will be very valuable to find a way to, if someone wants to somehow, I don't know about support, but to somehow allow this without having to fork Crossplane every time and try to basically keep up with what is going on there.
Yeah, I think that you raise a really good point with regards to a big part of the reason that people want to do this is because they have existing software that isn't a provider, and we're saying everything should be built as a provider, and we don't have a good pattern at the moment for taking, let's say, a plain old operator or something that exists there and translating it to a cross-plane provider.
Yeah.
And the reason we want to do that is because, we talk about the cross-plane resource model. We value consistency. We value people coming into our ecosystem and finding that one resource works like another resource, sort of thing. Like as a thought experiment, one thing that I think here is, let's say we open up composition and we say you can use composition for everything, and then it devalues the need for providers in the first place. You could then take another step and say, why have all of these providers? Most of our major cloud providers, there are existing projects out there like ACK and Config Connector and ASO. So you could start using composition with those and just not have providers. And then you don't have a package manager anymore to help with RBAC and make it that easy. You've just got to go handle all that by yourself. And then if you're using multiple clouds, you've now got to learn how ASO works, and you've now got to learn how Config Connector works. I guess I can see a path where we open this up and we bless this, and it means that Crossplane just becomes a composition engine and nothing else. And that's sort of what the project is. And then people who are using our composition engine don't feel like they're part of a cohesive ecosystem where they can know that if they're using IBM resources, they've taken the time to learn the tooling of Crossplane, to learn how to use this tool, to learn how to use this ecosystem. They go to use IBM resources and they work one way, and then they go to use AWS resources and they work another way, sort of thing. Obviously, there's always fundamental differences between clouds, but just things like references and secrets and things like that. I think there's a lot of value in the fact that we're consistent here, and I worry about opening up the floodgates to just lose that part of Crossplane and end up with Crossplane being a general composition engine where sort of there's really sort of no ecosystem around it anymore.
Well, I think the different pieces of Crossplane, the way it is designed now, they have value by itself, right? For example, providers, to me, they have value, even independent of composition, right? Because you have this kind of homogeneity and this way to provide this kind of high fidelity declarative representation of cloud APIs in a very consistent way that I haven't really seen in other projects, because it's true there are operators here and there to manage some infrastructure, but there is not really a consistent approach where you say, okay, let's install this provider and now I can actually have all these declarative resources for the cloud. I think those things still will have value. And composition, of course, is value by itself, and the open application model has value by itself. So yes, it's nice to have all these things integrated. I think they are integrated very nicely. It's good to actually use all these things together, but I think there will be always cases where people want to use just providers, or just want to use composition, or just want to use open application model. And that is common also in other projects in Cncf, right? If you're looking also Knative, for example, eventing or serving, those are things you can use independently, right? So I don't see why, you have to somehow constrain to say, you have to use everything if you use Crossplane, right?
Well, again, it's mostly, I guess it depends. I've been guilty at times of optimizing maybe too much for the maintenance of the project and making it easy to grow Crossplane, sort of thing. And again, from an architectural standpoint, when you decide to support more and more features and functionality and more variants of things, it cuts off paths that might have previously been open to you, sort of thing. It puts you into a box where you then have to say, okay, I have to factor in this thing, and that means I have fewer options in future. But I can see that this is something that folks are asking for a lot. I think that This is probably something that's going to come down to a steering committee decision at some point, and I think we have been putting it off for a while. And I would just absolutely encourage people to do what I think most of the people on this call have already done, and to help people in the community. Let's get a ton of experience reports in that issue. Let's let's keep them super specific so that we can build. People are like, I want to build a tool that does this. Here's my context for it, because I would still love to weigh it against the ability to easily build provider abstractions as this sort of plumbing here, but I know that that's a bit of a long shot. We don't have a really good way to do that at the moment, so love to be able to keep our options open and see if we can sort of find a way that is consistent within the Crossplane community to solve this problem. And I'm definitely not saying we will never open up composition. I'm just saying it is not a decision to be taken lightly, in my opinion.
So I think that a composition abstraction, I think what I'm hearing, composition abstraction from an architectural standpoint for composing Kubernetes resources would be quite useful. But I don't know whether or not Crossplane is exactly the right place to do it. I mean, what I could see would be that that abstraction would come, and then maybe the Crossplane composition resource would be a duck type that would be under that in some fashion. I think maybe that's, I don't know what might be done, but I mean, it sounds to me like probably Crossplane isn't the right place to do it, but I don't know. Maybe that's something the community needs.
Yeah, that's something that I was similar to what I was thinking. Though I'm not sure if Crossplane is not the right place to do it. I think having a better understanding of these use cases would help me form an opinion on that. I need to go and reread this issue. I will admit I haven't looked at it in the last maybe 1 or 2 weeks. But I think that, if folks were sort of just like, I'm, like you say, running Knative, and I just want to, compose all my Knative things, that starts to feel like it's not really part of Crossplane's. We have, Jared knows this better than I do, but we have a declared purpose and mission statement for the project that was part of giving our trademark and all that kind of thing over to the Cncf. So there is, to a certain extent, I don't know if we can just evolve the project to be sort of a general composition engine, or we maybe could, but like that would involve more than just doing it. That would involve, sort of repurposing the project.
Yeah. And some of the factors involved were like providing a consistent experience across all the resources that were being used. And so when you look at, like CRRs, when you look at like consistent status fields, and then being able to kind of aggregate those up, there's definitely like an experience component to that, where we could open it up to everything, but then there are kind of these like UX trade-offs involved. And it's definitely something that's like worth further discussion, but it's not a slam dunk either way. So it does require more discussion, and really appreciate you opening this issue or commenting on it. And it's something that we'll definitely discuss more, and appreciate your feedback on it.
Yeah, I guess one thing to add, like, I don't think the user experience needs to necessarily suffer just because, we want to add support for arbitrary Kubernetes resources. Like right now, it's already possible to do this within Crossplane, right, Nick? Like through the readiness checks. And, in the current system, there is like a optimistic default that assumes that the resources are, provider resources, right? Like they check for status fields. And that can be overridden by users putting their own readiness checks. Like in the current model, it's not like the user experience is necessarily worse if they're using, or it's not that the user experience is worse. It's that people need to opt into choosing support for, custom resources or arbitrary resources.
Yeah, I think that there's just some. I know this is an example of a controversial thing that we do, but for example, all of our resources from providers are cluster scoped. And so I think that then you can start, when you start to form a mental model of how things work in the Crossplane ecosystem, you can just be like, right, I've got this claim, it's namespaced, I've got this XR, it's cluster scoped, and then all my managed resources are cluster scoped. I would bet that that's almost certainly not the case for the other resources that people want to start composing. So then things like relationships between resources across namespaces, things like that, like start to become just, it's possible, and the people who want to do it probably hopefully have some understanding of this, but it just I feel like I feel like maybe the thing for me is when you describe what Crossplane is and how it works, it adds like another 3 sentences onto that sort of, maybe existing 2 or 3 sentence description when you need to account for, okay, now it's a general composition engine as well. So definitely if we were going all in and we were going to say that you could use composition for anything, like I do kind of think that maybe forking composition might be the way to go there, like a separate project that accounts for that. We could keep it under the Crossplane org or something like that, and call it, see how much it diverges, sort of thing. Call it an experiment and see how it works, and then look at upstreaming stuff there. But again, I do think that we need to get together with the steering committee and go through this one, because this is a pretty it's a very impactful decision on the future of the project, I think. I guess, part of my fear, as I say, is that you could just fragment the Crossplane ecosystem, sort of thing. I could imagine Crossplane becoming a thing where like a whole bunch of people just don't use providers. And maybe that's okay, but
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Yeah, if any folks want to weigh in with some more information about their use case and their expectations for this functionality, then on this issue 1730 is a great place to do that, because when taking a difficult decision like this, that has implications, and then also by its nature inherently has a lot of open-ended possibilities to it, that more information about what are the expectations from folks that are looking for this functionality, and what are their use cases, to kind of take that all into account is very, very helpful. So feel free to add more comments to 1730.
We could add a provider composition that was a general composition engine that translated things that you want to compose into a managed resource that we could then compose. I'm only half kidding. That might work.
Nice. Okay, cool. Yeah, so looking for more comments on 1730 for anybody. The discussion is open there. Dan, you 2166?
Yes. One moment here.
Yes, yeah, definitely want this in the docs for when to vote that one.
Oh yeah. Okay. So I just mentioned this because it needs to go in today and be back ported to the release 1.1 branch. In terms of review, I don't think it should be too extensive. It does move a lot of things around, but it's mostly like renaming and slight adjustments. And I think the commit order should make that pretty straightforward to follow. I tried to do my best to make that pretty digestible. As a reminder, folks can pull down this branch and run it locally if you want to look at it as it would actually be rendered in the docs in the crossplane.github.io repo. You can see the steps for doing that. So if you want to see it in that format, but in terms of actually executing steps, these are things that have already been tested. There is one small change in that I bumped the configuration packages to say greater than Crossplane 1.0. The main reason for doing that is just because I realized the crossplane.yaml snippets we had did not match because they didn't include the constraints in there. So that shouldn't change functionality for folks at all, because anyone using this documentation will need to be using 1.0 or later anyway. So would definitely appreciate some review on that today.
Is there anyone from the broad community, or I guess anyone who doesn't work on Crossplane from day to day, who'd be interested in reviewing that? I'm happy to do the final review on this documentation PR, Dan, but I'd really love it if someone else could take a pass first. That could be someone from our team, but I think it'd be super useful to have some people who weren't as like intimately familiar with these documents to sort of give their input on it.
And something that could facilitate that is, Dan, I know with if you're making changes to the crossplane.io site itself, you can have like through GitHub pages, you can have a publicly accessible page for your fork. Is that possible with the docs changes too? Is it possible to like somebody just click and go browse and see this experience live to kind of help reviewing? Or
not as easily, because that fork that's facilitated by it being in the site that gets rendered by Netlify. And this is like separate, so it's not actually in that repo. But I could do some stuff to get a demo out there, probably. So I could take a look at potentially trying that out.
Yeah, I wouldn't spend a ton of time on that. I
Yeah.
know there are some, some oddities with regards to the fact that we use HTML to like render out our tabs and things like that. But I still feel like people should be able to have a fairly good understanding of how this all works going through the markdown sort of thing. I guess what I'm asking is, like, often I am the one who reviews these things, and I am happy to do that, but I'd love it if someone else could do a pass first, because I'm not going to have time to look at it as deeply as I previously have.
Yeah, that sounds good. And like I said, this is something that was supported by feedback in Slack pretty unanimously, at least in my interpretation. So I think folks are already on board with this, and it is things that have been tested, so we shouldn't be too worried from that regard. But yeah, I think that it could be a pretty easy review for anyone who's interested, and that would definitely be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, it's gonna be something I'm interested in myself, Dan. To like build it locally and have be able to see the doc site locally.
Mm-hmm.
For context for folks on the community call, I guess Jared and I now have slightly different roles at Upbound, with slightly different responsibilities. And one part of that for me is I'm trying to find a way to keep up with the Crossplane community without as deeply reviewing all of PRs and things like that, because I have a few more things on my plate. So definitely looking for folks to help out there.
But I think this will be a big help for the experience and kind of getting started too. That was it was very fun to see the TGI Kate's episode on Friday, where they went into Crossplane and were going through the user guides and looking under the hood and stuff like that. So some of that was these documentation changes here were confirmed by that experience as well too. Kind of make it easier to get in.
Another thing that has been called out kind of by TGIK and as well as by some folks in the community is, and this should be a pretty small change. I don't want to include it in this PR, or maybe not even in this release by tomorrow, but there's been a couple folks that are like, can you please show how you could do any of the Crossplane CLI stuff, but with just kube control apply, which is what's happening behind the scenes. So it would be good if we could add some expandable blocks that have like, the provider actual object that gets created. And that should be relatively straightforward.
Yeah, I see that. That makes sense. Okay, cool. And then so GCP API gymnastics.
Yeah. Would it be okay if I share my screen for this one just for a couple
Yeah,
minutes?
yeah, sure. No problem. I'll stop sharing. Okay, it's all yours, Dan.
Cool. Thank you. All right. So this actually came out of the Autopilot stream. So for folks who didn't catch any of that kind of stuff, GKE added a new feature called Autopilot, where they basically manage your node pools and scaling and everything for you. Super cool feature. One of the things that we wanted to show off is how fast we can add new functionality to resources. So I did a stream. Can't remember. I think that was Wednesday, I believe, last Wednesday, where we added autopilot support. One of the things I kind of papered over in that stream is that required updating to a new version of the SDK that we use for GKE and a number of other resources as well. And so that actually broke the GKE. It removed some fields. It changed the API for GKE. Specifically, it dropped 2 fields, and that would be tier settings and enable peering route sharing. So basically, there was just no way to submit those via the SDK at that point. For context on why this is an issue and also how the GCP API works, they have some pretty good documentation, but I'm not a huge fan of it because I don't think it's super clear about what their policy is. But essentially they have V1, V1 Alpha 1 and V1 Beta 1, although I believe they don't actually support an Alpha API for GKE. But this is confusing because they use the same terminology as Kubernetes versioning conventions, but they're actually doing something different. So V1 Beta 1, as you would guess, we'll just talk about V1 and V1 Beta 1, has beta features. At some point, those features may be promoted to V1. During that promotion process, they may be changed or mutated in the way they're represented. And then the other thing that we obviously learned from needing this update was that V1 Beta 1 fields can just be dropped entirely. And so we can't really have, in my opinion at least, and I added a comment here just a few moments ago that kind of explains the situation. But as initially the person who added this API, I think that I probably should have gone with just using the V1 API. Although, you know, if fields were not breaking, it would theoretically be better to use V1 Beta 1, as you'd have more support for more things theoretically. But if they're going to be dropping fields from this or changing the API in breaking ways, then we really can't support this as a V1 Beta 1 or eventually a V1 API in Crossplane, in my opinion. So the proposal here is, instead of just bumping up the SDK, so we've previously had it pinned, so we didn't have to do this. But other implementations, such as adding this, I think this is like a DNS resource or something, required updating, which would drop these fields, as well as adding something like Autopilot, which was a new field, would require dropping these fields. So what I'm proposing here is we instead start creating beta groups for each of the different APIs, and we support two variations. So one in the container.gcp.crossplane.io and one in beta.container.gcp.crossplane.io. And the beta groups, or the types in the beta groups, that we always keep those at alpha, because we really are not in control of the field deprecation policy. And if you want to, or field removal, I guess, for that matter, and if you want to, you know, upgrade to a new version or add support for a new feature, you've got to be able to bump the SDK, which may result in breaking changes. So I'm proposing here that we switch to using the V1 API for the GKE cluster type. We also switch to using the V1 API for node pool, which is currently alpha. And then we introduce variations in a beta group for both of those resources that remain at alpha level forever.
So I broadly think that that's probably the right way to go. I especially stuff that's built on the beta API in Terraform. Sorry, that I'm saying Terraform because I have a thought that relates to Terraform, but stuff that's built on the beta API in Google seems like it, like you say, can never be, is effectively has the contract of alpha APIs in Kubernetes. So my only thought here, which relates to that Terraform thing, is they literally have two different providers. They handle this by having Terraform provider Google and Terraform provider Google Beta. I don't know if that would help architecturally or code-wise. I could see two things. One would be that if there were separate providers, you could install both, presumably. We could still put things in different API groups, but you could explicitly choose to not have support for beta stuff in your cluster by not installing that at all, to make sure that, you know, no one's ever going to use the beta stuff. And I'm not sure if there'd be any SDK impact there, or if like it would potentially remove these issues where we like really want to go and update an SDK because of some new beta feature or something that wouldn't affect V1. Seems maybe unlikely, but just a thought there.
Yeah, I had thought about that too, and I think Casey's on the call, and Casey had suggested that to me, which Casey and Move Off got some really great feedback on this last week. And I think I actually maybe didn't follow what they said, so but they had some good feedback that could potentially be better options. And one of them was that Terraform suggestion where they have two separate ones. That, you know, a couple. That's definitely a valid path to go. A couple things to note in that scenario. You could still run into issues with updating the version, you know, in terms of like between beta resources, right? So if we need to update the SDK, that could force us to drop, you know, on one API type that's also beta. However, those would all be marked as beta. One of the things that is also a consideration, of course, is that it would be maintenance of another provider, which is a non-zero cost. Although I think that every day our maintenance is getting better in terms of integrating with cloud providers. I could kind of go either way. For some reason, I feel like leaning towards having one thing, but I don't really think that is motivated. I don't have a good reason for that right now. So I'd love to see if folks on the call have a feeling either way. I mean, one of the things that may be motivating this is that this resource exists in this provider right now. Obviously, updating is going to cause like having to do a lot of manual changes anyway. So I think breaking it into another provider is really not that different. But I think part of me just feels like I want to continue to like support this in this provider, but I'm not sure that's really a great reason.
Yeah, I feel like, there's obviously upfront costs of forking a provider, but from a user experience, another thing that I feel like would be potentially confusing is, so my understanding is we basically can't have, we can't just, say that this is the V1 Alpha 1 version of this resource. And then there's a V1 Beta 1, and we have a webhook that translates between the two of them because of how variable the Google V1 Beta 1 stuff is, our Alpha stuff.
Right.
Also, it's two different APIs at the cloud provider level sort of thing. So it seems like the right thing to do here is to literally treat it as a different kind of XR, but then it's going to have the same kind, and it's going to only differ in like, does it have beta in its name or not? So another thing that I feel like would be kind of confusing is for people who just go and install the Google provider, over the fullness of time, like a lot of resources would end up being repeated twice, and it might be easy to accidentally use the beta GKE cluster when you don't intend to use the beta GKE cluster, or to interpret that by Kubernetes semantics of being like, oh, this is the alpha version, this is the. So I do kind of feel like breaking it out into a whole different provider that is like, hey, do you want beta APIs for Google? Like, then this is the way to go. Especially because, as far as I know, we can install those both at the same time. That feels like you'd be making a much more conscious, like, yeah, I really, I feel like we could position this as like, you should use the stable one unless you really, really need a new shiny feature that you want to try now, and you'll be going for, you'll get alpha semantics for that sort of thing. It makes it a more conscious decision as to what you're doing there. It also feels like it might give us a place to do some of this mental gymnastics explanation of being like, when you install the beta provider, all the resources are alpha and they will always be alpha or something like that.
Yeah, I think those are really, really strong reasons, and I'd agree with that. Just to open it up to anyone else as well. Does anyone else have contrasting or agreeing thoughts there?
I'll jump in about the separate providers. I think in the case of Terraform, you tend to just use one or the other. So if you find that you need beta providers, you just kind of use the beta provider, and there's not really a downside. It's mostly the same thing. Just I think a lot of the Google beta stuff is just, some people have beta access and get resources accessible sooner for new features. So you often want to just stay on beta. So I don't think the having multiple providers is probably not going to be an issue.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, one of the things in the short term is we're not gonna I think that if we make this change here, folks will not be able to upgrade their provider GCP until we have a release of the provider GCP beta. Which, I mean, in some ways is fine. No matter what we do here, it's going to be breaking, so they should probably stick there anyway. But initially, I'd imagine that we might do a provider GCP beta release that does not have support for all of the resources that are currently supported in provider GCP right now. But having the option to use both at the same time, if needed, even if that's not super relevant, could potentially be valuable for the short term.
Yeah, I think one benefit of potentially allowing them to conflict is that it could make the migration path easier. Like if you started out on the non-beta and you realize you needed some beta features, you could just install the beta provider instead, and all of your resources would basically work the same way, but you'd have some new fields available.
Yeah, well, the issue is there are equal fields with different names and stuff, so it's not just you switch over and it's an expanded API. Right. I think that's what I thought it was actually when we implemented this, but that's clearly not the case. So it may, I think I'd opt towards not having them conflict rather than trying to make that upgrade path. It's going to be hard anyway, smoother. But that's just my 2 cents.
Just as a side note, we have I think I'm in a meeting with the config connector team this week, maybe, so I can always ask them for tips on what they do to address this on their end of the world, because I obviously face the same issue. But yeah, there is a tricky thing here where I think, to Casey's point, if it was possible that we could just say these are mutually exclusive, you can only install one or the other, and that way you can just be running beta and then switch to V1 without changing your config for a lot of folks, that would be compelling. But it seems like it would require surgery potentially anyway. You would have to basically be sure that you only had like the shared set of fields on
a pretty small set of resources though, right? Then isn't it like there's very few fields that are actually conflicting?
Well, I guess the issue is that they don't make any promises about that. So
Yeah.
like I have context of one resource, which is not very, representative, and like the ability that we could run into the issue in the future because there is this sort of like this arbitrary policy.
Yeah, I think you're more likely to run into issues going from beta to release, right? Than going release to beta. You probably don't have like fields that actually go away going from release to beta. Your issue is probably going from beta to release.
Yeah, I think that's true. One of the things that is a bit of a misnomer that I just want to point out in that PR is it looks like there's a lot of functionality that gets added, but that's just because we're stale on the beta SDK. So I think you're right, Casey, that you going from beta to release is likely not to change too many fields.
So Jared and I need to drop now to go to another meeting. One thing I'd like to understand is how urgent is this? Is this feels like a kind of a fair bit to unwind. Do we really want to get this ready so that we can ship provider Google tomorrow? How much time do we have to make this decision?
Well, I think we have, potentially as much time as we want. I don't think, well, first of all, we don't need to ship provider GCP tomorrow, which is nice. I would like to get this done by the next time we ship provider GCP, which because of some things like rate limiting and that sort of thing, I would like to be not to be too far from now. But every time we kind of like release before we do this, it's kind of like building potentially more users or more places where someone's using this API that we're planning to change/remove. So I would say like it would be nice to have some conclusion on this by the end of the week.
Yeah. Okay. How do you think would drive forward with this? Like, it seems like there's a couple of different options that we put forward, which is basically support them both in the same provider, support them both in a mutually exclusive fashion in different providers, or support them both in a compatible fashion, i.e. under different API groups in two different providers. Do you want to maybe just in an issue or something like that, do a quick summary of the trade-offs in those, and then maybe we can try and make a quick executive decision I feel like we can maybe do this async or set up a meeting to force the function sometime later this week.
Yeah, I'll create an issue, and I think we can do this pretty quickly.
Or even tomorrow, by later this week. I mean, not today.
Cool. Thanks for all the input, folks.
Thanks for driving this.
Oh yeah, that's the last issue we had, PR issue to discuss there, and that is the conclusion of all the items in the agenda doc. So I think we can go ahead and wrap it up here, and the 1.1 release will be going out tomorrow as planned. And thanks everybody for showing up and contributing today. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Jared. Happy Monday.
Happy Monday.